Good afternoon. My name is Caitlin, and for those that don't know, my project involves exploring opportunities for woody biomass utilization in Coconino County by identifying and researching potential enterprises in order to aid forest restoration in the region. So first, I'm going to introduce the problem that this project is hoping to solve, talk about my project partners, methods and approaches, proposed solutions, my project outcomes, looking to the future, and references. So Coconino County has been on the forefront of forest restoration for almost 15 years with projects like the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project and the Forest Restoration Initiative. However, in Coconino County, like much of the western and southwestern United States, there are a number of barriers to forest restoration. First is the extensiveness of federal land in the region. Arizona is dominated by federally owned forests. In this state, there are 9 million acres of federal forests that are classified as at high fire risk or danger, including the Coconino National Forest, which is the majority of Coconino County and surrounds the city of Flagstaff. The marginal value of standing timber. The majority of timber that needs to be thinned from forests in Coconino County is ponderosa pine. Pine timber is traditionally less valuable than other hardwood species found in the Pacific Northwest and on the East Coast. And due to past logging practices, grazing practices, and fire suppression, there's been an accumulation of small diameter timber, which is less valuable because it can't be used for lumber purposes. And it also needs special machinery in order to process. The lack of existing sawmills and the lack of a biomass processing industry are also barriers. In the early and mid 19th century, northern Arizona was one of the most heavily logged regions in the United States. However, with the passage of several environmental laws and the listing of the Mexican spotted owl on the endangered species list, this industry pretty much disappeared from the region. This is a cost-benefit analysis from an area near the New Mexico-Arizona border, and this is the story with most forest restoration projects. The net present value is negative, or the costs often exceed the benefits on paper. This is a big problem for a barrier, especially looking at the federal level to obtain funding and project partners. And last is the rising cost of wildfire suppression. In 2015, wildfire management took up 52% of the Forest Service budget. That was up from 16% in 1995. Because of this, nearly every forest restoration program in the United States has had their their budgets cut up to 20% in the last 20 years, including cornerstone programs. So there's a lot of barriers in the region, which this project hopes to address. So originally when I started, my partner was the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project, but for a number of reasons that ended up not quite working out how I was envisioning the project to be completed. So in late December and early January, I started reaching out to forest stakeholders in northern Arizona to pitch my project and see if anybody was interested. And it turned out that quite a few people were. I ended up speaking with close to 20 stakeholders in northern Arizona from these different departments and areas, and they really helped to shape my project with their input, the research materials they gave me. Everybody I talked to gave me 5 more people to talk to, and I ended up really seeing these highlights. So in order to create enterprises that could benefit forest restoration, these were the main insights that I took from my conversations with stakeholders in northern Arizona. And the big one is this third one down, to utilize milling residuals and slash materials. I've decided to focus on this and allow it to narrow my project scope for several reasons. One was that in order for a business plan to really be successful, investors want to see around a 10-year guaranteed input supply. If you're working in forestry on federal lands, most U.S. Forest Service timber contracts are 2 years, 2 to 4 years. However, there are currently some of the largest and longest Forest Service contracts on history taking place in northern Arizona with the Forest Restoration Initiative. So there will be an immense amount of slash material, which is considered to be tree tops, tree limbs, bark, needles, and ground brush material. I also wanted to focus on this because this is a material that's mainly burned in the forest in slash piles. And it's a really low value, often viewed as a waste material. And I wanted to find ways to take that waste material and turn it into a high value product. So from all of this and research, I was able to come up with 4 products to research, which were biochar, compost, wood plastic composites, and mushroom cultivation. So in order to analyze and evaluate these enterprises, I used an adaptation of Arnhem and George's Transformational Sustainable Enterprise Framework, or TSE framework. The framework has 2 major components, an analytical and an evaluative component. Generally, this framework is used to evaluate already existing enterprises. However, I wanted to be able to use it to kind of frame and create potential enterprises. So instead of doing the analytical component first and the evaluative component second, I switched it. So I first used the evaluative component, which is a checklist of certain questions and criteria evaluating the sustainability performance of the business, to find research gaps, to identify what kinds of alternative business models could be used, and to address the overall sustainability of each enterprise. And then I created systems maps of each one for a visual component to my product. So this is what that evaluative component looks like. My 4 enterprise opportunities, and I used a color coding chart. This was pretty subjective because these enterprises don't actually exist. So a lot of this was me looking at what kind of products they are producing, the inputs, where the sourcing was coming from, and seeing how sustainable that product could potentially be. So obviously wood plastic composites has some more red flags than the other because it includes a plastic component or a polymer component in the creation. But what this really helped me do was identify research gaps and problems that enterprises would have in the future, like sourcing local material year-round. Flagstaff is one of the snowiest regions in the United States, so to source local material year-round, you either have to have a storage facility for it or not produce anything during the winter. This is an example of one of the systems maps. I created 5 total, 2 for biochar because I wanted to look at a mobile pyrolysis unit and a stationary kiln. And this helped me not only see what kind of sources, inputs, and outputs there would be, but create a visual presentation for my ultimate report that I will be giving to the city of Flagstaff of these business opportunities. So my major project outcomes and takeaways. First, there's a high level of interest in this project in Coconino County, very much so enough for another student to take up. Talking with people in the area, it was like every person I talked to had 5 more people to talk to, and eventually I was talking to Northern Arizona, it felt like. And Northern Arizona University is doing a lot of work on this as well. At the beginning of this project, I was a little frustrated that I couldn't find all the research that I wanted to, and then I started to realize that this is because this kind of enterprise is still an emerging body of literature, especially when it comes to using slash materials and not old timber. Third, a large-scale sawmill is critical for the success of forest restoration. If you're looking at building a wood products industry in the region, you have to have a sawmill. Fortunately, there is a contract holder with Fry that is planning on building a sawmill within the next 2 years, but they were also supposed to build one about 8 years ago, and that didn't happen. So fingers crossed that they will, and of course, the pace and scale of forest restoration will pick up in the region. And fourth, there is a lot of opportunities when I started looking at the system maps to create a cluster of business enterprises. There's a lot of intentional and unintended outputs of these enterprises that could be sold or used by another enterprise to form kind of a cooperative model of a wood products industry in the area. And when I talked with Dr. Hans Pun at NAU, he was actually looking at kind of the same thing. So we ended up on the same page. Looking to the future, collaboration and innovation are key. Those words are repeated a lot throughout the literature, but it really is true. Working with a mosaic of federal, state, and private land, collaboration is going to be extremely important, and innovation in the private sector will help aid forest restoration by providing the funding and the resources that the United States Forest Service doesn't have. Looking to my future, I am going to be presenting this in Flagstaff at City Hall at the end of May to the list of stakeholders that I previously mentioned, and hopefully county and city leadership. And I'm also presenting it via webinar to the Fire Adapted Communities Wood Utilization Community of Practice, which includes foresters across the United States, hopefully in April. And that's all.